think what keeps people coming back to this film so fondly is the authentic soulfulness of it. Seeing Gene Barge, seeing Mishak, Dennis Franz, Radon Chong, all those folks before they were stars. And Mayor Daley thought enough of you to die so that you could have a funeral scene. That was very, very good of him to do that.
Well, he gave me an opportunity because when we did The Fugitive, we had to figure out how to end the City Hall chase. I said, St. Patrick's Day Parade, because I wanted to, have him in the St. Patrick's Day Parade in this movie. And so he wouldn't show up for the set,
This is kind of what I describe as the Andy Davis music of chance. Always running through all of your films is this magical moment where you just improvise. It's like, okay, let's let him run away from the cops in a St. Patrick's Day parade. And let's have him trip over every drunk in Chicago and on State Street. And let's, use the mayor's funeral for a narrative thread.
Well, there's a lot of great stuff happening without having to create it.
Absolutely.
And a lot of, sorry I'm hoarse, I've been talking a lot lately. A lot of people bring so much to you. Like these kids, I didn't know what they were going to do. They were hungry young musicians, and we put them with really talented musicians through Gene Barge and who he brought to the set.
Absolutely.
Gina Barge is here, Gene's daughter, and Gene is doing great. He was at her wedding a couple of weeks ago. How old is he? 97. 97, and he's still spunky. Yeah.
Absolutely. I saw him play just 4 years ago. He was still playing. Daddy G. He's kind of the father of all of that here in Chicago.
So anyway, the point was that, it's pretty obvious. It's about how can people get along? How can they share music? And Richie was talking the other day, we were being interviewed, and he talked about the impact of walking in and hearing Gene bring that rhythm section from Natalie Cole's band. Why don't you talk about that?
So, obviously, I got this gig through patronage.
Everybody in the movies there.
And the fact that there was no budget and I was willing to work for what they were offering.
You Nepo baby, you.
This is Chicago way. Anyway, as you know, if you have any musical sensibility, you can tell I was pretty green up there. And it was, an honor to be with those guys. And, I definitely had a life preserver. Mr. Chris Righteous Johnson in the house.
Oh! We in a minute after we get it start boring, we'll have some people who are in the movie stand up besides this guy. Okay.
Anyway, what Andy's referring to is, when I was in high school and I was thinking guitar was, something that I wanted to follow, I met a guy in high school named Ron Rollins who I was at that point, like most guitar players of my era, listening to B.B. King and Jimi Hendrix and, all the usual guys. And Ron, who looked like Jimi Hendrix and owned a white Strat, he said, check out Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I bought the record, and when I put it on, I looked like the RCA dog. I was like, because I respected him so much, I forced myself to listen to it until I could sort of really start to see what was going on. And so me and all my contemporaries were sort of posing, trying to be jazz fusion kind of people. And it really was not good at all. It was a lot of notes, and it was a lot of not listening to each other. And anyway, we would be jamming all day at the production facility. And then, Andy had met Gene, and Gene put together a rhythm section. He brought down Chris, Tennyson Stevens, Donnie Hagen, Larry Ball, himself, Gene, and they came in and they sat down and they started playing the Crusaders' Way Back Home. And instantly, all the staff who had been ignoring us for 2 weeks stopped. They knew something real was happening. And it was an epiphany for me, and it was great as a young musician to see, okay, this is real music. They're listening to each other. They're paying attention. They're in the pocket. They're soulful. and that was a great lesson for me, and it served me well for the rest of my career.
So it's. I did a documentary a couple years ago about two incredible Italian photographers, and it's called Mentors. And I realized this is a mentor movie.
Yeah.
And Chuck D did a documentary with us a few years ago about this movie, and he said, you see films about sports, and there's the coach and there's the kids, but rarely do you see a film about music where you have a mentor like Gene, who does this in real life. And then he talked about how the fact that the film didn't talk about race, it's not about race, and yet it's all about race, or not about race. And so I was just talking about music again. I was blown away tonight by all the music.
Absolutely.
I'm so close to it, I can't relate to it, but now I just related to it for the first time, And,
I saw this movie when it first came out because my father was in the funeral business, and he used to sell burial vaults to Pizer Funeral Home, which is a funeral, 78th and Stony, or 68th and Stony. And he said there's this movie about, it's on Stony Island, it's all about the funeral industry, So he took me down, and he gave me the money, and I went and saw it in the theater. And I was just, knocked down by it. I thought, this is the Chicago I know. This is not the Chicago you see in other movies where it's Michigan Avenue or, Grant Park or, the North Side. This is the Chicago I remember from childhood.
Yeah. And because, the movie's sort of a blur to me, and I realize it's sort of like this soap opera story about these kids and struggling to put a band together, But then David Matthews' score, the way he wove things together and kept it kind of a poem and I noticed we just remastered The Fugitive. James Newton Howard did the same thing. So what I'd like to do is have composers who can allow me to just shoot great shots, or shoot shots of the city and shoot shots of people coming and going and have it be interesting because you're getting an emotional pulse with what they're playing.
And kind of a sense where every single character in this film comes from. You see, Richie wake up in a farmhouse. You're lucky you didn't get caught.
Richie worked, and so much of this thing is
that was a real place when I was in high school. It was called Pleasant Valley Farm, 420 acres. People know about it. The Community Renewal Society, and we would go up there as high school groups, and then I wound up working there, and they would have groups that would come in either for a couple days or for the week from the inner city, and that was a real place.
They should do that now.
Yeah.
I hope that actually happens. But when I first saw this film, I thought, finally there's a film where there are black people and white people together, and there's no violence. There's just this goodwill. This idea of
I felt
creating
tonight.
something.
I make my father the bad guy, and I kill him.
Yeah.
And it's happened in a couple films, and in Holes he lived. But anyway, there was.
But in Thief, which is a Michael Mann movie, he got to design the coolest safe cracking tool that has ever been made. But I think what keeps.
So it was a goal. This is a film. And I said it's because my parents, they believed in people living together. When the neighborhood started changing, Richie grew up as the last white kid on the block, and Stoney was his buddy. And I thought, having been around Trumbull Park race riots in the 50s on the south side of Chicago, when a black family tried to move into an all-white housing project, in the steel mills, all the bars became clubs. And bombs were going off for a few years. There's a novel called by Frank London Brown called Trumbull Park. I grew up with that, and it traumatized me. It wasn't like Iraq or it wasn't like Israel right now, but it was traumatic. And years later, when I saw Mean Streets and I saw American Graffiti, and these guys had made films about their growing up, I said, shit, I got a richer background than that.
What's also wonderful is that I saw this film, and then about 10 years later, your cinematographer was the cinematographer the first movie I was ever in.
Tak Fujimoto.
Fujimoto, who, by the way, just painted Chicago in the most loving.
Well, it's interesting. This is the film. Actually, can look better than this, but the blacks can be blacker. If I had Warner Brothers giving me the money to remaster the negative, it could be a little more. So The Fugitive is that. It's unbelievable what The Fugitive looks like now. If you get the new Blu-ray and buy this stuff, but anyway, things are changing. I feel very lucky to be sitting here with my brother. My sister's the nurse inside of the hospital. She was a nurse for 30 years who came up with the Fugitive plot, told me how to do a drug protocol to get a doctor in trouble. And Richie has got an incredible band. Would you tell him a little about what you do today, sir? He's the hardest working musician in Chicago.
I have a mic. For the last it'll be 38 years, the Chicago Cats have been a band, and we started out. Thank you. If you know who they are. We started out as just guys who knew each other from playing. I was in a band, and Mr. Doug Epting. Stand up, Doug. Where are you? Oh, no, put your hand up then. Worked with me in Max Tracks and Third Rail, and Doug went on to be Marcus Miller's right-hand man and Kool and the Gang and a cast of others as well. So we were in those type of bands, and then we wound up being studio musicians, and we were very pleased with our newfound success, making money that was paying the bills, but we missed playing in front of people dancing, and so we put the Chicago Cats together as just a kick-ass cover band, and now we do, an abundance of upscale weddings and corporate gigs and that kind of thing, and it's a nice business and great musicians, and Stony Island, definitely my experience with Chris and guys of that level let me know what that experience is like when you can play with people who are sympathetic and understand how to listen to each other, and the Cats has been a nice representation of that for the last 38 years.
I want to thank a bunch of people who are here tonight. I see Madam Brown, the Brown sisters. Can you stand up? This is Oscar Brown Jr.'s progeny. And I got to tell you, Oscar was such an influence on me as a kid. I wore his records out, and my dad, he hired my dad to be in some of his shows, as a matter of fact, And then Chuck Stepner, where are you? Stand up, Chuck. This is the man who introduced me to Gene Barge. Okay. And Gene and Chris, why don't you stand up, okay? Chris Johnson, who's the guitar player who had the afro. And this is Gina Barge. This is Gene's daughter. And Lee Farmer, stand up. This is another musician artist, her new husband. Now, this is an amazing story. This will break your heart. They own the Goldfish Company store where Percy died. Okay, so she told me a story today, though, because she was a teacher, and she witnessed our mother doing.
I was a sub for your mom.
She was a sub for my mom, and she said that she wrote her a letter because she couldn't believe what a great teacher she was.
It warmed my heart. They were the best class I'd ever encountered. I wrote her a very long letter.
I'm going to put you in touch with my mother tonight.
Oh, she's around? Oh, my God.
No, she's not, but I'm going to do it.
Andy, every time you come back to Chicago, your family gets bigger.
Anyway, thank you. It endeared my heart earlier, really, it did. Anyway, who else is here who helped work on the movie? Please raise your hands. No? Okay. Some people couldn't come tonight who wanted to be here. And Susie Hoffs has got her own book that's come out she's promoting. And just in terms of the future, I'm supposed to hawk everything because that's in the music business. You have to sell T-shirts and CDs and stuff like that. I wrote a novel that's coming out next summer called Disturbing the Bones. It's a political thriller set in Chicago and Cairo.
This is your first novel.
Well, yes, with a great writer named Jeff Biggers, who I worked with, and it's inspired by the movie I did called The Package I did with Gene Hackman and Tommy Lee Jones. And so look for that. And get married and hire Richie. And who am I missing? I want to thank everybody here who did this. Where's Bill Virgos? Where's Bill? Oh, now this is the best story of the night. This is the reason we're here. And is your mom here? Okay, so did you notice there were a couple funerals in the movie? So Lucia Camellis, dear Lucia, who became one of the most successful script supervisors in Hollywood, worked with Ridley Scott and all kinds of people. She was the production manager on this movie. I don't know how we met, but she was great. So said, Lucia, we need some limos for the night ride, and we need limos for Daly's funeral. So she says, well, I'll call George Virgos. He's the big Greek funeral director. So sure enough, George shows up, and he's got everything we need. He's got dollies, and he's got the right equipment we could possibly use for moving bodies around. And I see this guy. He's this handsome Greek with a great mustache and a nice shiny head. And I thought, you got to be the guy who's the professional funeral guy, in the scene. So he's in the garage in a couple of shots. So Bill, years later, said, through a producer friend of mine, partner of mine, said, ask Andy if he'd be interested in having my company, Freestyle Releasing, handle the future. So it's available now on all kinds of platforms. There's you can buy a Blu-ray or DVD, and they're online on AndrewDavisFilms.com or Stony Island Films or something like that. You can watch this 30-minute documentary, The Making of Stony Island, with Quincy Jones and Chuck D. And it's all about how the film got put together. Tells what happened to the kids and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, and I want to make sure I don't forget Tamar Hoffs, who was a writer who I met on a movie called Lepke at Warner Brothers. And it turns out her brother and my brother were growing up the same way in Chicago, and she worked on the script with me, and her husband would help put the money together with her. And so she can't be with us tonight, but she's part of this whole thing, as so many others are, who I can't thank everybody tonight. Okay.
Also, our former pal has gone to the great beyond, Studs Terkel. His son Dan Terkel is here.
Who doesn't like to be treated with a lot of publicity? Yeah. So this is an interesting story because my parents, Nate and Metta, were actors in the Chicago Repertory Group that Studs was a part of, and also Haskell Wexler. So when I graduated in '68 and wanted to be a director, I wanted to be an assistant cameraman, Studs told Haskell I was around, and I got to load magazines during Medium Pool and get gassed and be chased. That was my introduction to meeting Haskell, who became my mentor. And later on, I did a documentary about mentors recently. Yeah. And this is a mentor movie. So anyway, but Studs and Ida were very close to our family, and Richie is in the book Race. Yeah. About his journey years when you were 30-something. Talk about Studs.
No, I'm a chapter with a buddy that I went to high school with, and we're sort of bookends in his exploration of race in Chicago, with my experience of being the last white kid on the block and having a buddy who we were very tight, and he wound up actually becoming an assistant to Louis Farrakhan. So it was a very interesting dynamic for that book. It's worth the read. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask us before we say goodnight? Oh, good. Oh. Yes, sir.
The sax player named Harold in honor of Harold Blankenship?
Yes, and I should talk about that. So that is George Englund Jr. His father was a producer for Marlon Brando. His mother is Cloris Leachman.
Oh, wow.
And we found him through Tammy. She knew him in L.A. And he's definitely named after Harold Blankenship, the character in the total ripoff. And you notice the hat that Harold Blankenship was the kid in Medium Cool who liked the pigeons that Haskell created. And what's really interesting, the hat that Harold wears here is the same hat Tommy Lee Jones wears in The Fugitive. Same goofy hat, military hat. There's another question here, yeah.
Two quick things. I saw Joe Friedman's name on the credits. Is that your sister?
Yes.
And I'm from the South Side. So anyway, also in the movie, when you were shooting city scenes, did you have to more about more stuff about the actual street Stony Island? Were you like shooting city scenes, but then you had to cut out some of it?
Well, I cut out a bunch. There's a whole other alternative ending to this movie. And Richie works in Maxwell Street to make some money to pay for the horn that Harold stole. No, I'm sure there was a lot of other footage we used, but this seemed to be what we needed. I didn't have to study Stony Island too much. 63rd and Stony Island to me was the center of the universe. We forget from Jeffrey Manor or the southeast side. You had to take the Jeffrey bus to 63rd and Stony, and that's where people were coming in from New Orleans. The Greyhound station was there. They had a baseball game going on all the time in the summer, and you get on the L and you go through the whole heart of the South Side. Mm-hmm. And Louis Armstrong got off the Illinois Central a few blocks away, and Herbie Hancock went to Hyde Park High School, and we drove our bikes by Bo Diddley's house. So it's a whole. Gene Krupa went to Bowen High School. So there's an amazing history of that neighborhood. Yes. There's a record that I don't control. Unfortunately, we got screwed. It was on TK Records, and I think it's Rhino has it now. But it doesn't have all the David Matthews stuff. And there's a few things we should, Billy Preston was actually in the scene. I cut him out, but there's some other good stuff. We should probably just make available some of the David score and some of the outtakes. Richie's 80s bands, 70s, 80s bands called Max Trax and Third Rail, who were very hot. Tell them about that. Promote yourself.
Rob Sevier, anyone from the Numero group here tonight? No. Okay. So anyway, we had a band, and I was in the band with Stoney's younger brother, Stevie Robinson. And we were called Third Rail, and then we got signed, and we found that we had to relinquish the name. Someone had it copywritten, and then we became Max Trax, but we made 2 records, and we were pretty prolific in Chicago between 79 and 82. And it's been re-released. It's on Spotify, and both albums on Spotify and Apple Music, and you can go to the Numero group and buy a double vinyl. Vinyl's back. My son has a Bluetooth turntable. Say, this is my beautiful son. Say hi, Emilio.
Emilio Davis.
I love that he copied my hairstyle. And so that's what's happening with Max Trax. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Well, listen. Thanks everybody for coming. Tell your younger kids and people and friends that it's available. It's available. Go to andrewdavisfilms.com and you'll find all these different websites that are available to see this on many different platforms. Freestyle Releasing is the distributor. Okay. Thanks a lot.